Welcome to our deep dive into the future's most vulnerable and potentially dangerous populations. Now, I know what you're thinking. Haroon, why would you start a video like that? It sounds like the beginning of a dystopian sci-fi film where everyone fights over scraps of food and water. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong to think that, because the future, much like a Michael Bay movie, has a nasty habit of exploding in unexpected and often unpleasant ways. Today, we'll explore 7 groups that could face significant challenges or pose major risks in the coming years. We're not just talking about isolated incidents here, folks. These are issues with the potential to snowball into full-blown global crises if left unchecked. Think of it like this. Remember that time you ignored a tiny oil leak in your car and then suddenly your engine looked like it was auditioning for the next Fast and Furious movie? Yeah, we're trying to avoid that, but on a global scale.
First up, we have the climate refugees. Now, this isn't some niche group of people who exclusively vacation on melting glaciers. It's a growing population forced to flee their homes due to the increasingly unwelcome houseguest that is climate change. We're talking rising sea levels swallowing entire islands, extreme weather events turning homes into disaster zones, and once fertile land drying up faster than a Kardashian's tears after losing their phone. And where do you think all these displaced people are going to go? That's right, they'll be on the move, searching for safe havens, resources, and frankly, a place to catch a break from Mother Nature's increasingly erratic mood swings. This mass migration, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. It puts a strain on resources, ignites political tensions, and creates a humanitarian crisis that would make even the most jaded aid worker shed a tear. Think Syria's refugee crisis, but amplified by rising tides and scorching temperatures. We're talking about millions, potentially billions of people displaced by a problem they did very little to create. They'll be looking for new homes, new livelihoods, and new hope in a world already struggling to cope with its existing population. The potential for conflict, both within and between countries, is about as high as a giraffe on a stepladder. It's a humanitarian crisis waiting to happen, and the alarm bells are already ringing louder than a One Direction reunion concert.
Next, we turn our attention to the younger generation, specifically those stuck in the pressure cooker that is a conflict zone. Now, I'm not talking about your average teenage angst here. This is a whole different level of disillusionment and anger, fueled by a lack of education, zero job prospects, and the constant threat of violence hanging over their heads like a rusty ceiling fan in a horror movie. Imagine being a young person in a war-torn country. Your childhood is a distant memory, replaced by the constant roar of bombs and the ever-present fear of being caught in the crossfire. There's no school, no jobs, no future, just the grim reality of survival. Now tell me, in this environment, how easy do you think it is for extremist groups to recruit desperate and disillusioned youth with promises of purpose, belonging, and frankly, 3 square meals a day? These young people are not inherently dangerous, but their circumstances make them incredibly vulnerable to manipulation. They're a tinderbox waiting for a spark, and unfortunately, there's no shortage of people willing to light the match. We're talking about a generation at risk of becoming both victims and perpetrators of violence, trapped in a cycle of conflict that seems impossible to escape. It's like being stuck in a never-ending game of Grand Theft Auto, except the stakes are real lives, not just pixelated points on a screen.
Now let's talk about those living under the watchful eye of Big Brother or whatever colorful nickname their particular authoritarian regime prefers. We're talking about citizens living in countries where freedom of speech is about as welcome as a fart in a spacesuit, and human rights are treated like suggestions rather than fundamental entitlements. Think North Korea, but with potentially better snacks. These regimes thrive on control, suppressing dissent with the subtlety of a rhinoceros in a china shop. They monitor their citizens' every move, restrict access to information, and crush any whiff of opposition with the efficiency of a teenager crushing a can of energy drink after a long gaming session. Now you might think, well, as long as they keep their heads down, they'll be fine. But that's the thing about pressure cookers, folks. They have a nasty habit of exploding. When people are denied basic freedoms and treated like cogs in a machine, resentment simmers. It might start with whispers of discontent, but it can quickly escalate into full-blown protests and uprisings. And when an authoritarian regime feels threatened, well, let's just say their response is rarely measured or proportionate. We're talking about a potential powder keg of civil unrest, with the potential to spill over into neighboring countries and destabilize entire regions.
Chapter 4. Left behind in the digital dust, the technologically disenfranchised.
Next up, we have a group that's often overlooked in our tech-obsessed world, the technologically disenfranchised.
These are the people who are being left behind by the digital revolution, lacking access to the internet, technology, and the skills needed to thrive in an increasingly digital world.
And before you start picturing your grandparents struggling to set the clock on their VCR, this is a much broader issue than you might think.
We're talking about entire communities, both in developing countries and right here in the supposed developed world, that lack reliable internet access, affordable devices, and the digital literacy needed to navigate the online world.
This digital divide isn't just an inconvenience, it's a socio-economic chasm that's widening faster than the gap between Jeff Bezos' wealth and everyone else's.
Without access to online education, job opportunities, healthcare resources, and even basic information, the technologically disenfranchised are being left behind in a world that's rapidly moving online.
This creates a two-tiered society where those with access to technology thrive while those without fall further behind, leading to greater inequality, social unrest, and frankly a whole lot of frustrated people who can't even enjoy a good cat video on YouTube.
Now let's talk about cities, those bustling hubs of opportunity, innovation, and unfortunately, extreme poverty. As more and more people flock to urban centers in search of a better life, we're seeing the rise of mega slums, sprawling informal settlements where poverty, crime, and lack of opportunity are as common as pigeons fighting over a discarded hot dog. Imagine living in a densely packed slum where basic sanitation is a luxury, access to clean water is a daily struggle, and the threat of disease is as constant as the smell of garbage in the summer heat. This is the reality for millions of people living in urban poverty, trapped in a cycle of deprivation with little hope of escape. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's unfortunate, but it's not exactly a global threat, is it? But here's the thing. Desperate times breed desperate measures. When people have nothing to lose, they're more likely to resort to crime, violence, and social unrest. And when you have millions of people living in these conditions, it creates a powder keg of instability that can ignite with the slightest spark.
Remember that time when a global pandemic brought the world to its knees, exposing the fragility of our healthcare systems and the inequality that plagues our society? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because that was just a taste of what the future holds if we don't get our act together as we encroach further into the natural world, destroying habitats and increasing our contact with wildlife. The risk of novel viruses jumping from animals to humans is higher than ever. And let's not forget about the looming threat of antibiotic resistance, which could render our current arsenal of drugs about as effective as a chocolate teapot in the face of a future pandemic. Now imagine a highly contagious and deadly virus ripping through a population with limited access to healthcare, inadequate sanitation, and a government ill-equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude. We're talking about a potential collapse of healthcare systems, economic devastation, social unrest, and a death toll that would make the Black Death look like a walk in the park. Finally, we come to a demographic shift that's often overlooked amidst the more immediate threats we've discussed: aging populations. Now, this might not seem like a recipe for disaster at first glance. After all, who doesn't love a good grandparent? But the reality is that a rapidly aging population puts immense strain on social safety nets, healthcare systems, and most importantly, the younger generation. Imagine being a young person entering the workforce, saddled with student loan debt, facing a competitive job market, and then being hit with the added responsibility of caring for aging parents and grandparents. It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope, stressful, unsustainable, and frankly, a recipe for a hernia. This burden on the younger generation leads to economic strain, social tension, and a potential decline in innovation and productivity as young people are forced to prioritize caregiving over career aspiration. It's a demographic time bomb ticking away. And if we don't address it soon, we risk creating a future where the young are overwhelmed, the old are underserved, and everyone's wondering who's going to pay for it all. While these scenarios highlight potential risks, it's crucial to remember that proactive policies, international cooperation, and technological advancements can mitigate many of these dangers. We're not talking about throwing our hands up in defeat and accepting a dystopian future. We're talking about facing these challenges head-on, with the same determination and ingenuity that put a man on the moon and convinced us all to carry tiny computers in our pockets. The goal should be to identify and address these vulnerabilities before they escalate into significant threats. We need to invest in sustainable development, strengthen global institutions, promote peace and diplomacy, and ensure that the benefits of technological advancements reach everyone, not just a privileged few. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of where they're born, what they believe, or how old they are. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more insightful content.